It's very nice to see so many people able to stay longer today and listen to Dhamma. So the Buddha's path is it's a holistic path. It's listening to Dhamma, practicing generosity, various things, cultivating ethical conduct. Really making our conduct agreeable and peaceful and calm and supportive of other living beings. And so it's a whole. The practice is multifaceted, multi-sided. And so now is this afternoon the opportunity to listen to Dhamma. As I mentioned earlier this morning, that Ajahn Karuniko has kindly accepted the invitation to offer a talk. And then we'll close the afternoon with the circumambulation of the stupa, the chedi in the field out there. Do a little bit of chanting out there. And maybe, I don't know if anything's been arranged on the monastic side, but is there anybody in the lay community that wants to do the invitation for a talk? Anybody? Okay. Sadhu.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yes, I'm very pleased to see so many people turning out for this Vesak gathering. And yes, this is my 41st year as a monk, and the first time I've been asked to give a talk on the Vesak celebration. Yeah, Lumpur Sajit was away, and no visiting more senior than me, so Ajahn Hindsko's asked me to say a few words today, which I'm happy to do, to share some thoughts, especially around this theme of the birth, enlightenment, and passing away of the Buddha. So a theme that I'd like to bring to mind through these reflections is, say, the difference between believing and knowing. And my own sort of coming across Buddhism, because I was brought up as an atheist. So religion, my father said religion was the opium of the masses, so I wasn't brought up in any particular religious tradition. But I got interested in spiritual things in my early 20s through some experiences and things. And so I started to talk to my friends at work who were Christians. And but what they said to me is, you have to believe this, you have to believe in Christ as a saviour, you have to believe this. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't just take on a belief. And I went to I was working in North London, so I then went to the Hare Krishna temple in North London to talk with them. Same thing, you have to believe. And then one day at work I was talking to a friend, and he said, in Buddhism you don't have to believe in God. Oh, that's interesting, And it took me a while actually to find a book on Buddhism. This is in the sort of, when would it be, sort of late 70s. Very few books on Buddhism. But I found one eventually, and I liked what I read. I liked the sense of not having to believe things, but to investigate, to use wisdom and reflection. So I think from that day I really became a Buddhist. I liked what I read and it just made sense to me. So, reflecting on the Buddha's birth, enlightenment and passing away. Interesting to Ajahn Karuniko mentioned the other day about, in the Theravada Sutras it says the Buddha was born on the full moon of May, realized enlightenment 35 years later on the full moon of May, and passed away at the age of 80 on the full moon of May. And is this true? Do we have to believe that? Yeah. But that's what it says in the sutras. One can keep. I always think keep an open mind. Also, interesting enough, the Buddha was born under a tree, enlightened under a tree, and passed away under a tree. Because when he was born, his mother was travelling to her birthplace to give birth, which they did at that time. And she got caught short, you could say, and gave birth on the journey under a tree, holding onto the branch of a tree, according to what's written down in the Theravada Sutras. And of course, the Buddha, when he left the palace, lived in the forest and meditated in the forest and enlightened under the Bodhi tree in India 35 years later. Then interesting enough, because by the time the Buddha was 80, he was really famous in India, and many of the kings, really were quite devoted to him. But he still chose to die under the sal trees in Kusinara. He could have gone and spent his last days in the palace if he wanted. He was born in a palace, but he chose to pass away beneath trees. And just interesting things to reflect on. That the Buddha's example of just living simply and devoted to a more simplicity of life it's an inspiration for us Sangha anyway. That he chose to always live in simplicity, not to get carried away with any sense of fame, wealth, and these sort of worldly things. Yeah. So, yes, the Buddha was born actually in Lumbini, in India. And there's one particular episode in the sutras where the Venerable Ananda is reflecting on all the, miraculous things that happened around the Buddha's birth. So, the mother gave birth, stood up, holding onto a branch of a tree. The Buddha didn't come out by normal channels, it came out the side. Came out the side of her body, totally unsullied, and came and walked 5 steps, and then made the pronouncement, I am going to be like world conqueror. Yeah, well, interesting. Yeah? Do you believe that? Do you have to believe that? That's what's written down. And when you look at the Buddha's teachings, he said, he never really wanted people just to believe things. He wanted people to know things for themselves. What can you know for yourself? Yeah. Now, in terms of this recitation around the birth of the Buddha, I don't have to believe, but then again, do I have to disbelieve? Can I just keep an open mind and say, I don't know? And that's allowed. Yeah? I can just say, I don't know. It's written down, but I wasn't there. But I think that's good to have that open-mindedness, rather than, even if it seems quite, not scientific, I'd say, we can tend to brush it off. But how just keep an openness of mind? I feel this is healthy, rather than saying, I don't experience that, so I don't believe it. Yeah. It's not scientific, so I don't believe it. Yeah, so that openness of mind. So not having to believe, and not having to disbelieve, but just say, I don't know, and keep an open mind. I think this is healthy in the sort of spiritual practice. But then, the interesting thing about this particular incident then, so Ananda was talking about all these wonderful things about the birth of the Buddha. And the Buddha comes along and says, what were you talking about? And then Venerable Ananda says, just tell him about all the wonderful things around your birth. But then interested in the Buddha's response. He says, okay, these are, wonderful things, but let me tell you about a more wonderful quality of a Buddha. And this wonderful quality, the Buddha said, the Buddha knows feelings of pleasure, pain, and neither as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. The Buddha knows perceptions as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. A Buddha knows mental formations as they arise, as they persist, as they cease. Now, Ananda, see this as a wonderful and marvellous quality of a Buddha. So, the Buddha pointed out what we can know. What we can know. Now, the Buddha's way of relating to these experiences is probably quite different from people who haven't really practiced the Dhamma. People caught up in seeking pleasure and trying to get away from pain. A natural tendency. Getting excited when everything's going well, but then getting depressed when everything's not going well. So how we relate to the experience of life and the pleasant things of life and the unpleasant things of life, which is all our experiences, isn't it? And the Buddha's risen above that. His mind is at peace, whether it's something pleasure or painful, he's risen above. So it's not just it's a special knowing. When you think about memories and perceptions, the way we look at things, our memories, the way we can get sort of caught up in, different perceptions and memories, how they can trigger off confusion and unpleasant mind states. Yeah? But that doesn't happen for a Buddha. He sees them as just things that arise and cease. He's not caught up in memories and perceptions. And then mind states, different mind states we experience, and again, knowing them for what they are. And not getting overwhelmed by these different mind states, not getting carried away by other mind states. So it pointed at this knowing these things. Right? And knowing that somehow gives us a wise perspective on our experiences. So we don't get sort of overwhelmed by them. They don't lead to some more confusion and suffering. Yeah. So it's interesting that the Buddha always brings it back to the practice of what we can know and how to relate to our experience in terms of developing more mindfulness and wisdom. So, the Buddha raised in the palace all the comforts and all the best that time could offer to somebody, and live entertainments, and all the best food and comforts. But of course, as the story of the Buddha's life goes, he sneaked out the palace one day and saw an old person, a sick person, and a person who passed away. And when the Buddha saw it, he didn't say, "Oh, poor thing," he actually, he said, well, he said, what he could reflect, that's me one day. I'm going to get old, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to pass away. And for the Buddha, it spurred him to think, is there anything I can realize, understand that when that happens, it won't be a problem for me? When I get old or sick or die, there won't be any suffering around it. It won't be a problem around it. But then he saw the fourth, we call Devaduta, the fourth heavenly messenger. He saw a sadhu, an Indian sadhu, meditating. And he thought, maybe that's the way to bring about the realization that when old age, sickness and death comes, it won't be a problem. I think he also had the intuition that there was something beyond birth and death. There was, like I said, the nibbana, the unborn, unformed, that which was beyond birth and death. He had this intuition. So, left the palace and practiced for several years. Did all sorts of extreme practices. I think one of the things in India was asceticism, which still happens. The idea if you mortify the body enough, then maybe this quality of the deathless or whatever would pop out of a mortified body. But of course he did that, and he didn't come to any realization. So then he remembered when he was a child, sat under a tree during the farming, when his family were doing the farming, and just naturally practicing mindfulness breathing. So he started to practice mindfulness of breathing, and then his meditation really took off. All sorts of knowledge and understanding came to him. And then he realized enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in India. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the way it's portrayed on paintings and things about the Buddha's enlightenment. See, the Buddha sat on the Bodhi tree, and he's surrounded by all these images, sensual images, fearful images, all these different sort of images. And this is called, in Buddhist language, the hosts of Mara. Mara is like the maybe the equivalent to the Christian devil. And Mara, you can personify as something external, but also you see Mara as maybe just the natural defilements we experience as human beings. We as human beings, we do experience unwholesome states of mind. It's just part of the human condition. So you can say Mara is like unwholesome states of mind. So bringing that concept to the Buddha sat on the Bodhi tree and the hosts of Mara around, he said, these are representing maybe the mind states the Buddha was experiencing. Desire, fear, aversion. But what happened on the night of enlightenment, because the Buddha had developed his meditation to a very high level, was he touched the earth. He touched the earth. And then all these things disappeared, and then the Buddha realized enlightenment. That all, you say, the greed, the hatred, and the delusion of the mind ceased, and were left an enlightened Buddha. It's like the knowing was fulfilled. He knew it all for what it was. And he wasn't going out to get caught up in it. He wasn't going out to get caught up in greedy mind states. He wasn't getting caught up into averse mind states. He wasn't going out to get caught up into fear or worries or anxieties. He did, because he knew them for what they were. And because of this knowing, they lost their power. And when these things lose their power, they disappear. no power over the awakened mind, the knowing, this knowing nature. Even after the enlightenment, there are stories where they say Mara still comes. You know, he's in the forest, and Mara comes and says, "You should be back at the palace looking after your wife and son." And the Buddha just says, "I know you, Mara." And then Mara says, "Oh, the Buddha knows me," and disappears. Now, these are all qualities that we can all develop. It's not just a quality the Buddha can develop. This knowing we can all cultivate and develop. To know, the things in the mind that are not skillful, useful, and learning the skill, letting them go. We can all be like Buddha, because the Buddha was a human being just like us. But he cultivated these things. He cultivated this mindfulness and this wisdom. Then, of course, after the enlightenment, left him in a very blissful state, the mind that's free from greed, hate, and delusion. And initially didn't feel to do anything about it because he felt what he'd come to realize was too subtle. But then he was encouraged by a Brahma, Sahampati, that's like the request for the talk. Just like the Brahma Sahampati told the Buddha to teach for the welfare of beings. And so he decided to teach, which I'm very grateful for. Decided to teach what he learnt, and did that for 45 years. And that's why, the Buddhist teachings are quite vast. Many books of the Buddha's teachings, because you give a lot of talks over 45 years. Yeah. But of course, the Buddha said, we don't have to know a great lot of things. And one example he gave when he was with some monks in the forest, he once picked up a handful of leaves. And he said, "What is the greatest number, the number of leaves in my hand or the number of leaves in the forest?" And of course the monk said, "Well, the number of leaves in the forest is much more than the number of leaves in your hand." And then the Buddha said, "Well, what I've come to know is as many as leaves in the forest. But what you need to know to liberate yourselves is as much as the leaves in my hand." So just the basic teachings of the Eightfold Path, really. If we cultivate those and take those to heart, they will be the teachings that can take you to the end of suffering, to liberation. Knowledge is okay, but sometimes it's, to focus on what we need to know. Especially knowing the mind, rather than having a lot of knowledge, knowing our own mind. You can have a lot of knowledge about things, but still suffer quite a lot, because you don't understand the mind. So, going on this theme of belief again, there was one incident where a group of people called the Kalamas, they came to see the Buddha. And they were a bit confused, because there was different, sort of popular teachers around in India at the same time as the Buddha. And they said, well, this teacher teaches this teacher teaches that, and this teacher teaches this. Who do we believe? And the Buddha said, well, you don't have to believe any of them. In fact, he said, don't even believe me. But he said, and I didn't tell you, if anything I say you think is helpful and useful, then you can use it. If it's not helpful and use it, then you can just let it go. So you're never trying to force any beliefs on people, but just encouraging people to reflect. So in this particular sutta, then he did say to the Kalamas, okay, if somebody's mind is obsessed with greed, and because of that, They harm living beings. They take things from living beings. They exploit living beings, adultery. They lie, cheat, abuse. In fact, in line with the precepts, isn't it? Is that? He's asking the question: is that for your welfare, other people's welfare? And of course, the Kalama said, no. Just behaving that way is not going to benefit oneself or others. Same with hatred. When people's mind are caught up in hatred, then again harm living beings, take advantage of living beings, do all sorts of things. Is that a benefit for oneself or others? Again, with deluded mind states, the same thing. Is that when one's caught up in delusion and behaving inappropriately, is that for one's benefit or for other people's benefit? And of course, the people say, no, that's not a benefit for oneself or others. They can see that from their own experience. And then, of course, he asks the opposite. Okay, if somebody is living a life not just, following their own greed, but, more, maybe you could say to be more generous, be more kind, be more peaceful. Is that a benefit for oneself and others? Of course, the Kalamas could see, that would be a benefit for oneself and others. So just encouraging people to reflect. Not to believe anything, but just to know. To investigate for oneself. What are the results of our actions of body and speech and mind? What results do they give? So again, this knowing for oneself, investigation. And then Buddha, in the same sutta, went on to say that, when people do practice this practice of lessening greed, lessening hatred, lessening delusion, a natural outcome of that is a mind that has more kindness, more compassion, more appreciative joy, and more equanimity. He goes on to say how this naturally, as a natural thing, leads to more of these Brahma Viharas manifesting in one's life, these more wholesome mind states. And then again, whatever you might believe, if you practice these things, if you believe in going to heaven or not, or you don't believe in heaven or not, it's conducive to a happier life in the here and now, living in this way. So, this is one thing I really appreciated about, the Buddha's way of teaching, is that, he wasn't trying to force anything on anybody, but just encouraging people to reflect. He actually wasn't trying to convert people to Buddhism either. He wasn't trying to get more disciples. In fact, some of the people who came to him got so inspired, they said, "Oh, can I be your disciple?" And he would say, "Well, you've already got your own following." He said, just whatever's been useful, use it and help support your own disciples. So he encouraged them to go back to their own situation and just practice the teachings. And again, with this Kalamas, he wasn't putting down the other teachers. He wasn't saying, "Oh, that teacher's a load of rubbish." And this is the worldly way of thinking, isn't it? You always try to put other people down to make yourself look better. Politics and all this, But he wasn't doing it. He wouldn't do that. He didn't put in other teachers down. He just wanted to teach people to reflect and develop their wisdom. So I always find this very inspiring, especially coming from maybe from an atheist background, where a lot of people do try to convert me to Christianity. This is the only way. This is. Where the Buddhist approach was, if it's useful, then follow it. I just really related to that way of reflecting. One of the the ways the Buddha would answer questions was by asking a question back. Buddha had different ways of responding to questions. One was a short answer, another was a more detailed answer, another one was responding by asking a question back. Another one, if it was more of a speculative thing that wasn't going anywhere, he'd just go quiet. So the Buddha would stay in the forest. And in India, it could be quite cold in the morning and the ground quite hard. And so one of the local sort of princes happened to be walking through the forest and came across the Buddha, sit under the tree. And the prince saw the Buddha there. It was cold. He said, "Oh, hey, did you sleep well last night?" And the Buddha said, "Yeah, I slept very well." And then the prince said, "But it's really cold and the ground's hard. You haven't got a mattress or anything. You're just sleeping on the ground. How did you manage to sleep well?" Then the Buddha asked him a question. "Okay, you're a prince, aren't you?" He said, "Yes." "You have you live in a palatial place. Yeah, you've got nice secure walls and nicely decorated. You've got a lovely comfy mattress." "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, I've got all that." And he said, "Well, if your mind was obsessed with greed, would you sleep well?" So he asked the prince. He says, "No." "If your mind was obsessed with hatred, would you sleep well?" And the prince said, "No." "If your mind was obsessed with some sort of delusion, some sort of fear, worries, would you sleep well?" And the prince said, "No." So he said, "Well, for the Buddha, he referred to himself as the Tathagata. For the Tathagata, there's no greed, hatred and delusion. So wherever the Buddha is, he sleeps well." Yeah. So he always pointed out finding this sort of inner well-being and refuge to our practice, rather than depending on the external conditions, be able to sleep well wherever you are, to be well wherever you are. It's one of the qualities of, one of the Buddha's Sugato. We chant that in the qualities of the one who goes well, because of the quality of his being and his mind, and not obsessed with greed, hate and delusion. And, when you look at the Buddha's life, an example, he had lots of challenges. His cousin tried to kill him. But he was able to sort of deal with it skillfully through his, to the way he was and to his spiritual development. But also, there was difficult monks. When the Buddha, like as in the Sangha for the monks, we have 227 rules, and the Buddha didn't just dream them up. As the monks did unskillful things, he laid down rules. And so 227, that's a lot. But it's interesting in terms of, there was one monk, one of the rules for monks is we don't eat in the evening, right? And this monk was eating in the evening. So somebody told the Buddha, "Oh, this monk's eating in the evening." So Buddha said, "Oh, well, invite him to come and see me." So the monk came. And Buddha, he didn't he wasn't heavy, He said to the monk, the Buddha eats between dawn and midday, which is the time when, monks are allowed to eat. And because of that, the Buddha enjoys good health and well-being. So he said that to the monk as an encouragement for him to do it. And the monk says, "Well, I eat all day long." And I feel good health and well-being. That's the way we responded to the Buddha. And it was all right. He made his point. He dismissed him. But it's interesting because he planted a seed. And that monk went away and he started to feel a bit remorse about not keeping the rules. So eventually he stopped eating in the evening and came back to apologize to the Buddha. Well, it's interesting, sometimes when we tell people things, they don't respond so straight away, but we can plant seeds, can't we? We might ask people to behave in a certain way, but they don't initially respond, but you planted a seed. And I think that's always the first step, how just to plant a seed and see what happens. Yeah. If we have to give feedback to somebody, rather than getting heavy. So, when there's a very nice book called Life of the Buddha, and about his life, and his whole example, I think, was in many of the incidents in his life has been an inspiration. Remembering examples from the Buddha's life, all the challenges he had and the abuse he got, and somebody tried to take his life. That he kept his good example, and his for future generations. So the Buddha was a human being, so he passed away at the age of 80. Sometimes I wonder, the karma of all those ascetic practices meant he didn't live such a longer life, but because the things we do in our youth sometimes manifest the karma of it in our later lives, and if we've abused the body in some way later, we could have to pay the price for that. So again, the Buddha deciding to die under the twin sala trees. Now, one of the qualities that the Buddha's referred to is the Karuniko, the great compassionate one. And there's a very nice story about the Buddha's compassion related to the end of his life. Because his last meal was by Chunda the blacksmith, who gave the Buddha his last meal. And apparently the food wasn't good. It was some sort of meat dish that wasn't good. Because after the Buddha took it, he said, don't give it to anybody else, just bury it. But he ate it himself. And after that he got really sick, and then he passed away soon after that. Now that's interesting that before the Buddha passed away, he said to Ananda, the blacksmith Chunda, he might feel bad that after his meal I passed away. Yeah, imagine that. It might feel quite bad about that. So tell the blacksmith Chunda, the two most auspicious meal offerings is one, the last meal before the Buddha's enlightenment, and the last meal before he passes away. Really compassionate, rather than saying, well, give me some bad food. We're a bit of a blame culture, aren't we, in these days? We have to blame somebody. But he said, no, tell him that's a very auspicious food offering. And to me, it's just a great example of the Buddha's, great compassion for people. And then, another example, so he's lying there, about to pass away, and this ascetic wants to come and ask the Buddha a question. Right? His name was Subhadra. He gets to Navelamananda, and Navelamananda says, the Buddha's about to pass away, don't disturb him. Yeah? Naturally, he would say that. But the Buddha said, oh, Ananda, let him come. Let him come and ask his question. So, he let the Subhadra come, and he asked the Buddha, again, a question. There's all these teachers who claim to be enlightened. Which of them is enlightened? And the Buddha said, don't worry about that. Don't be concerned with that. Yeah. But he said, but the advice, he didn't say who was enlightened, who wasn't enlightened. He wasn't into, they say, judging people and knocking people down and things like that. But he just said, whatever teachings contain the Noble Eightfold Path, there you will find enlightened beings. That was the last teachings he gave to Subhadra. That's a very wonderful answer. In whatever teachings, they say, I'm right, they're wrong, and this is right, this is wrong, and they've got it all wrong, I'm all right. Whatever teachings contain the Noble Eightfold Path, then in that teaching you'll find enlightened beings. So that was the last sort of teaching he gave to the ascetic Subhadra. Then, of course, we come to a little bit about the more, again, miraculous things around the Buddha's passing away. Yeah. So he died between two sala trees, and they blossomed out of season, and the whole air was filled with a fragrance. Yeah. And then it is said that many, besides human beings, many deities came to come and pay respects. The whole place was just filled with human beings and deities. Yeah. And they've all come to pay respects to the Buddha. Now again, it's not something you have to believe, but this is according to the suttas. Yeah. Well, interesting enough, just as a side note, that the Buddha taught human beings during the day and early evening, but in the late hours of the night, they said he would teach the deities, the devas. Yeah. In fact, one of the, again, not have to believe this, but interesting enough, one of the teachings that he gave to devas was a very popular teaching. It's called the Mangala Sutta. And if you know in our chanting book, it said that a deva came to the Buddha in search of what leads to peace and happiness. And then the Buddha gave this teaching of the Mangala Sutta. But the teaching's all down to earth stuff, It's nothing esoteric, just about associating with wise people, about, cultivating generosity, patience, respectfulness, all these wonderful qualities. But the question was asked by a deva, according to the suttas. So, all these wonderful things happening just before the Buddha's passing away. But then, interesting again, the Buddha's comment. He says, all this reverence for the Buddha is all very nice and wonderful. These people coming to pay respects and from different realms and things. But then he said, the best way of showing respect to the Buddha is by putting his teachings into practice, by practicing and following the Eightfold Path. That's the best way to pay respects to the Buddha. So again, I'm always bringing it back to, the practice and knowing for oneself rather than belief and speculation, and how to, again, maintain an open mind. Another situation about open-mindedness is, well, I don't know about you, but sometimes I've been on the end of people explaining some of their conspiracy theories to me. And some are a bit weird and wonderful, actually. And again, I use the same principle there. Really, I don't know. I don't have to know. I just keep an open. No, people are entitled to believe what they want to believe. Yeah, but I can say I don't know, and I don't judge it. I don't say that's a load of rubbish. I say I don't know. And I'm again pointing what we can know, isn't it? What we can know. We can know our own hearts and minds, and what leads to wholesomeness and what leads to unwholesomeness. And again, with certain ways of thinking, what's the effects on the mind? This is something to reflect on, isn't it? If we're mind's always obsessed with the conspiracy theories. What will the effect of that be on the mind? So that's what we can know. So how we think and how we consider things, it does affect the mind. So that's the important thing, to know the mind, and what leads to more wholesome qualities of mind, and what helps us to abandon unwholesome qualities of mind. That's the important thing. And that was the Buddha's encouragement. So the Buddha passed away, and his last words to the monks around him were, "Subject to decay of all compounded things, strive on with diligence." That was his last words to the Sangha that were around him at the time. And he realised what he set out to realise, and shared his wisdom and experience with us, and encouraged us in our practice. And again, saying that was the most important thing. So I've shared a few thoughts, and again, for me, the not how to just believe things, but just to know for oneself, cultivate that knowing, that awareness, that awakeness, which we can as human beings. And as one lessens greed and aversion and delusion in the mind, it really does lessen suffering, and it gives rise to much more wholesome mind states, and that's what we can all cultivate. And if we do spend time following these wonderful teachings of the Eightfold Path, then it is a great benefit. So we have, I would say, we have the blessings of these teachings, and opportunities to practice. So I encourage people to make good use of it and use these teachings, and hopefully lessen suffering and find more peace and wisdom in life. So I'd like to offer these reflections today.